A Michigan State Police detective is facing second-degree murder and manslaughter charges tonight.
This video was intended to inform and educate the public.
50-year-old trooper Brian Keely legally and grossly negligent.
Police use of deadly force and the outcry that it brings. It is all on video. April 17th, a crime task force out looking for felons with warrants out came across Samuel Sterling, a probation absconder, putting air in a car tire. He ran. Officers gave chase.
Welcome back to the Junkyard News. In today's video news story, we're talking about Detective Sgt. Brian Keely, who is a Michigan State Police trooper and has now been charged with murder as well as involuntary manslaughter. This announcement coming from the Attorney General of Michigan's office, felony charges against Detective Sgt. Brian Keely for an incident that happened back on April 17th that resulted in the death of a man identified as Samuel Sterling. Now, Keely is a member of the Michigan State Police 6th District Fugitive Task Force, according to the Attorney General's office. Now, the Michigan State Police trooper is accused of fatally striking a 25-year-old man in an unmarked vehicle during a pursuit and faces these charges. Now, video footage shows Sterling being struck by an unmarked SUV as he attempted to flee on foot from law enforcement officers in Kentwood, a suburb of Grand Rapids.
I'm Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel. Shortly before noon on April 17th, 2024, Michigan State Police Detective Sergeant Brian Keely, as part of the MSP Fugitive Task Force, attempted to bring Samuel Sterling into custody when Mr. Sterling fled by foot. A number of MSP troopers and other local law enforcement agents proceeded to chase Mr. Sterling, both in their vehicles and by foot, when the vehicle Detective Sergeant Keely was driving turned and struck Mr. Sterling in a nearby fast food restaurant parking lot. Mr. Sterling was transported to the University of Michigan Metro Health Hospital, where he succumbed to his injuries later that day. My office has reviewed multiple police reports from other officers on the scene, read the accident reconstruction report and autopsy, as well as watched body cam footage and surveillance videos from neighboring businesses prior to completing our investigation. We have found that Detective Sergeant Keely's actions that day were legally, grossly negligent, and created a very high risk of death or great bodily harm, which could have otherwise been prevented. As a result, today we filed the following charges against Brian Keely in the Kentwood 62B District Court. 1 count of murder in the second degree, a life offense, or alternatively, 1 count of involuntary manslaughter, a 15-year felony.
Now, MSP officials have said Sterling was wanted on multiple warrants that had to do with probation violations when officers spotted him and approached him that day as he was putting air in a vehicle's tires at a local gas station when he spotted officers and attempted to flee. Now, law enforcement pursued Sterling on foot and in vehicles. Now, Sterling was running through a parking lot of a fast food restaurant when Detective Sergeant Brian Keely decided it would be a lot easier to end the pursuit by using his vehicle as a deadly weapon and ended up hitting and crushing Samuel Sterling, which caused Sterling to fall to the ground, reeling in pain, then being handcuffed by police, not able to do much of anything due to the extensive injuries his body sustained. He was then transported to a local hospital, but due to the severity of his internal injuries, he did not survive. In a statement, Keely's attorney claims that the Attorney General's office has chosen to ignore the facts of this incident and rely on political pressure.
Detective Sergeant Brian Keely, driving an unmarked MSP cruiser, drove up to and hit Sterling, briefly pinning him against a fast food restaurant wall.
These guys were part of a crime, allegedly, and they're running from the police. And aren't we supposed to try to catch the bad guys? And we are human beings, and we make mistakes. I'm not even sure a mistake happened here, in my opinion.
What's more, he says, police veterans are now quitting the job, not wanting to face felony charges for doing their jobs. And he adds, these kinds of charges hurt recruiting.
And we used to have waiting lists for academies. We used to have 7 or 8 academies running every year. Now we have academies with nobody in them.
Nobody wants you around, period.
His attorney added that the loss of Mr. Sterling's life is tragic. but said the incident could have been avoided had Sterling turned himself in or complied with police commands to stop. Well, doesn't that make a whole lot of sense? All right. My client didn't do anything wrong because the guy didn't want to go into a cage. That may be true, that he didn't want to go into a cage, but using a vehicle in that manner as a deadly force object, as a weapon, is not and was not lawful. In Michigan, as in many other jurisdictions in the United States, the use of a police vehicle to run over a fleeing suspect is subject to strict scrutiny and legal constraints. The use of deadly force by law enforcement is governed by both state law and federal constitutional principles, particularly the Fourth Amendment, which protects against unreasonable search and seizures as well as excessive force. There has been case law set and precedent regarding legal standards for use of deadly force in this country. Take Tennessee v. Garner from 1985. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled that deadly force may not be used to prevent the escape of a fleeing suspect unless the officer has probable cause to believe that the suspect poses a significant threat of death or serious physical injury to the officer or others. And take Graham v. Connor from 1989. This case established that all claims of excessive force by law enforcement must be analyzed under the Fourth Amendment's objective reasonableness standard. Some factors to consider in that standard include the severity of the crime. What was the severity of the crime in this case? What, he didn't check in with his probation officer? He was wanted on probation violations? That doesn't sound extremely severe. Whether the suspect posed an immediate threat to the safety of officers or others? Well, they didn't know or believe he was armed in any way. They didn't see a weapon. He was just running from police. He didn't want to get locked in a cage. Now, under Michigan law, similar principles do apply. The use of force by an officer must be reasonable and proportional to the threat posed by the suspect. Michigan police officers are trained and expected to follow these guidelines. Deadly force can only be used if a suspect poses an imminent threat of death or serious bodily harm to an officer or others. As far as use of vehicles as weapons, using a police car to run over a suspect would generally be considered the use of deadly force. Therefore, it would only be justified under extreme circumstances where the fleeing suspect posed a clear and immediate threat. But there was no threat here. Not to mention, most police departments do typically have policies that outline acceptable use of force criteria. These policies generally prohibit the use of vehicles to intentionally strike a suspect unless there are no other options available and the suspect's actions pose an imminent danger. Again, there was no imminent danger here. Well, other than the imminent danger of him getting away and outrunning donut-eating cops. So in conclusion, while it is theoretically possible for a police officer in Michigan to use a vehicle to stop a fleeing suspect, such action would need to meet the stringent requirements for the use of deadly force, and the decision would be scrutinized in the context of reasonableness and necessity, and it would likely be subject to significant legal and departmental review. I have a feeling that this guy, this 50-year-old, is going to get hung out to dry, especially in this case where there was no weapons involved as far as the suspect goes. He was just running away. He didn't want to get locked in a cage. He was only wanted on probation violations. So he didn't check in with a probation officer. Sure, that was his fault, but did he deserve to die over it? You tell me in the comments. What do you think?
It is all on video. April 17th, a crime task force out looking for felons with warrants out came across Samuel Sterling, a probation absconder, putting air in a car tire. He ran. Officers gave chase. Detective Sgt. Brian Keely, driving an unmarked MSP cruiser, drove up to and hit Sterling, briefly pinning him against a fast food restaurant wall. Sterling then slumped to the ground, officers searching him and cuffing him. As for the second-degree murder charge, Brian's parents, Michael Sterling and Andrika Cage, told of the case and of the video.
I can't watch it because it's too graphic for me. But I'm glad, they charged him.
We glad he getting charged. We just hope he get charged for the fullest.
And hope he get convicted.
But Michael went further, saying the other officers not charged deserve discipline as well.
Had their knee on his chest, handcuffed him, turning him over. And it was just standing there watching him die. So I feel, some of them should get charged too.
Samuel writhed in pain and later died in the hospital.
Thank you again for watching this video news story by the Junkyard News. Be careful, people, I'm telling you, or we could be talking about you in the next video. Thanks for watching.